You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. And on today's bonus episode, I did a short interview with West Des Moines mayoral candidate MJ Hoag. Obviously, I live in West Des Moines, so I wanted a chance to talk to MJ about some of the issues that directly impact me, but I also thought it would be a good window for those not in the area to kind of see what's going on with progressive politics here in the flyover states. I hope you enjoy. All right, welcome everybody to another exciting, little fun, little bonus episode of Fruitless here. I am joined today by West Des Moines mayoral candidate, MJ Hoag. Hello, MJ.
Hello. Nice to be here.
It's good to talk. Yeah, so I guess I kind of want to start off with a big picture question. There's a lot of people who listen to this that aren't from the Des Moines area, but there are some that are, and so I kind of want to get started in a big picture and then move really local here. So I wanted to ask where you see the possibility for progressive politics in Iowa right now. Right now things feel pretty bleak for those whose politics don't line up with Trump's Republican Party or here locally Reynolds' vision of the Republican Party. By choosing to run, you obviously believe better things are possible. So help me be a little less cynical here. What are the possibilities you're seeing that I'm not?
Part of it's just as progressives, you can't win if you don't run. You can't find each other if you're not visible, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to get out and try. And, the first time we try, we're going to lose probably, right? But you've got to build those movements. You've got to build that momentum. You've got to build that knowledge and capacity to actually accomplish things.
That's great. I obviously wouldn't have known about you had you not run. So in some sense, right. it builds up more awareness of not feeling alone here in this very red state currently.
Yeah. And one of the design of suburbs kind of leads you to be isolated in a way that, you aren't necessarily when you live in a big city, where you can actually meet people just milling about, right? And when we're all in our little cars, we're very isolated from each other. So we have to do what we can to get out and actually meet each other.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned cars here, so that actually segues into one of the first things I wanted to ask you about, because when I was looking at your list of issues on your campaign, it felt a lot like you had been in the car hearing me vent to my girlfriend about things I'm frustrated about as a resident of West Des Moines. And one of those things is DART, which is, for those not in Des Moines, that is the public transit here in the Des Moines metro area. And it sucks. So to paint a picture for those who don't live in this area, I work, one of my jobs is at Merle Hay Mall. So occasionally I have to take the bus from West Des Moines to Merle Hay. For those who aren't in the area, that is, if you take a car, about a 15-minute drive. You hop on the highway, go about halfway from West Des Moines to Des Moines and take an exit, and then take the road all the way down until you hit Merle Hay. I'm simplifying it a bit, but it's roughly that. If you take DART, the bus, you'll hop on the bus and it will take between an hour to an hour and a half to get down there. You will go through, maybe 20 stops throughout West Des Moines and then go all the way to downtown Des Moines, where you will go to the big, bus station down there. They will make you get off of the bus because it's technically turning into a different line. So you have to walk off and pretend you're not about to step right back onto the same bus you just got off of. Then get back on and go another 20, 30 stops all the way north Des Moines, eventually drifting back into the west to Merle Hay. So something that is a 15-minute drive takes an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the weather and the traffic. So this is a bad, unsustainable situation. What could we do to make DART not like this?
Yep. So that is a surprisingly big question, because part of it's just funding, right? You actually have to fund the bus system enough that that you can run the routes. Some of that actually just boils down to urban planning and how we lay out our cities. So the problem you're kind of describing there is the fact that DART is very much a hub and spoke model. So everybody, if you're, depending on where you're going, you go to the central location and then back out, which definitely makes things take longer. But like one of the issues with kind of public transit here and public transit in a lot of places is that there's just not enough density to really support the level of ridership that you need for it to seem like it makes a lot of sense. So some of that is, and actually some of that DART is moving towards right now. They're reducing the number of routes, but increasing the frequency on the routes that they have left, which will make it suck a little bit less, provided you're near one of the routes that stick around. But then also it's just like, we need better urban planning. We need to make sure that there's enough people to ride the routes so that we have political will to actually like improve it. Since most people drive and most people can drive, DART kind of gets viewed as this charity for the less fortunate, which it's hard to get funding for charities, right?
Yeah. Well, when I started taking the bus to my Merle Hay job, everyone acted like that was like, something really unfortunate I had to do because my girlfriend and I share a car. So sometimes it was always like, oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. It's like, I've been to Chicago or something. Taking the bus shouldn't be a bummer.
No, it shouldn't. And I always like, I kind of look at it as like, well, shit, if I can get down to being like a 1-car household, the amount of money that would save me is significant. And I was like, is it worth it to me to spend, like, I don't know, an extra $5 or $10 a year in taxes to not spend several hundred in car insurance, to not spend, several hundred in gas every year? Yeah, that seems like a good trade-off. But not everybody sees it that way.
Yeah. So yeah, I really like this idea of making it so that DART is something that everybody uses, because in major cities this is kind of the case. Like, unless you're the richest of the rich, you probably use public transit in some form. Yeah. You have a line on your issue page, on your campaign page about making DART not suck that I really like, which is that we don't have a functioning bus system until people can take the 2 a.m. bus home from the bar. And that's good. I mean, the open secret of Des Moines or Iowa is just a lot of people just drive drunk. Yeah. Because there's no functioning public transit.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that's like kind of ridiculous to me. Like, our urban planning says like bars have to have a certain minimum level of parking. It's like, but you don't want people to drive drunk, but you require what are we doing here? It's like we build stuff in a way that basically encourages drunk driving, and then we're like, oh, why are people driving drunk? Gee, I wonder.
Something you've also pointed out that I think is really notable, and I think this is something, if you're not from Iowa, will sound crazy, which is what our bus stops look like.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of places, their bus stops are, basically a stick in the ground. It's a sign that says, this is totally a bus stop, you guys. But yeah, it's like, especially when your bus routes are running, it's like, oh, there's one bus an hour. I don't know, maybe give people a place to sit. Give them a roof so that they're not standing there in the rain or, having the sun beat down on them. Like, let's have a basic level of dignity for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, okay. So moving away from public transit here, another issue that you are pretty focused on here is housing in West Des Moines. As I don't know, as someone who is steadily watching my rent increase, what do you plan on trying to do about that? How do we fix housing in West Des Moines, and maybe starting off with affordability here? Yeah.
So that's another big question, and there are. So I am not like an ideological purist. I'll take ideas from any side of the political spectrum if I think, oh, that might help. So like I pull a lot of ideas from Strong Towns, if you've ever heard of them, right? And they're a little more conservative leaning, but it's like, hey, what if we got out of the way in terms of regulations? Like allowing duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. Those small multiplexes that we don't generally allow in otherwise single family zones. And so one of the examples that I kind of use there is, so growing up, one of our neighbors decided he could use a little extra money every month. So he converted his upstairs into a little efficiency apartment. So he turned his house from a single family home into a duplex. So that provided him with a little more income to help pay his bills. It provided somebody else with very affordable housing. And it, as his neighbor, it didn't change my life at all, right? And I look at that and I was like, well, shoot, that didn't cost the city any money, and it made it everybody's life who was involved in that got better. Why wouldn't we allow that? Yeah, so that kind of thing. And then I kind of like Valley Junction in particular, like you wander around here and there are all kinds of stealth duplexes like my neighbor's house. There are triplexes and a couple of quadplexes that I know of. And you wouldn't even necessarily recognize them as that by just like driving around the neighborhood. But like you walk around and it's like, oh, that slightly large house is just a small apartment. Neat.
Yeah.
Right. But that kind of thing both enables, like more people to become landlords, whatever your feeling on landlords is, but like, it enables more people to like live in their own housing and then afford it even like into retirement because, like maybe their kids are renting the other unit or, or whatever. That's like one piece of the puzzle, I think, is just like allowing things that we really haven't allowed in a long time.
Sure.
There are, like kind of like more nitty gritty things where like you start talking about like single stair reform. So that's where you allow smaller apartment buildings to have one stairway instead of two for egress, which you get some pushback on, from like the fire department on that. Cause, obviously like they want to keep people safe. They want people to have a sufficient number of exits. But like Europe has single stair, but they also build buildings out of concrete rather than wood. So like not quite the same thing, but like Seattle has had single stair for, I think, a couple of decades. And it's fine, right? It's, you've got to make sure that like you've got the necessary stuff to keep people safe, right? That is not just like, oh, we're building this, flammable tinderbox and removing, potential means of egress. But, so like you want to keep people safe, but like there are ways to do it that would be fine. That would increase the number of, units that we can put in a particular area, which does help, like you divide, if you divide the construction costs of something out by, 4 families instead of 1, that does reduce costs, or at least has the potential to. So.
And increases the amount of housing there is, which,
right.
In general reduces the cost of housing.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, like increasing supply is a big part of just like making sure there's enough, because like, well, why do housing prices keep going up? Why do my property taxes keep going up? Well, it's because my housing cost, like because the value of the house keeps going up, which is because we don't actually build enough housing for the supply to meet the demand. So that drives prices up. That's how markets work. So, and so like one of the kind of like big ideas that I have is more the Vienna model, where she's like, okay, we've unleashed all of the housing that we can via like regulatory reforms. Let's just build municipal housing, right? And West Des Moines kind of has an unwritten rule of not competing with the private market, which obviously, like, I don't care about that rule. I don't mind competing. So, like, Vienna, and that's definitely the more like socialist side of policy spectrum, right? But like Vienna built a bunch of housing way back when, and they own it, which means they can charge market rate rents, but they can also charge much less than market rate, because like it doesn't matter as a municipality, like whether you make a profit on the housing, so long as you break even, right? You've got to make enough to cover the costs, to cover the maintenance, all of that stuff. But that means you can have people who are making lots of money in the same housing as people who are making a lot less. And so long as it all balances out, that works. And if you have mixed income in the particular housing, generally speaking, the people who are better off are better at like advocating for improvements, because, like if you're not tired from working 3 jobs, you have more energy to go advocate for yourself. So they can kind of help lift up the people who don't necessarily have as much energy because they're working a lot more and not as well off. So
absolutely. Well, we looked here at like, affordability and stuff, but, we can move then into the other side of fixing housing, which is tenants' rights.
Yeah.
This is another issue you care quite a bit about.
Yeah. So one of the things that I don't, and I'm not a renter, so I can't speak to this maybe as well as you can, but one of the things that it seems like we don't do very well as a city is kind of stand up for renters and like hold landlords to account for like making sure that they're providing really high quality housing. And, like, I think you're a renter, so like, you can speak to that more than I can. And so like one of the things that I think we should do both as a city and, like whether I get elected or not, I'll work on, is pushing, people to form what's known as a tenants union.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of this?
Tenants union? Yeah.
So for the listeners who aren't familiar with that, a tenants union is kind of like a workers union, except it's tenants within a housing development kind of banding together so that they can have a more unified voice, a little more power when they're arguing with their landlord for something. Right. So, like you as an individual, like if you go on like a rent strike or something, your landlord's going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to evict you and get somebody in who will pay. Right. But if 90% of the people in an apartment complex are doing a rent strike, that's a lot harder for your landlord to be like, oh, I'm just going to evict everybody, right? So like by banding together, you have a lot stronger voice and you can do both a better job of advocating for yourselves with your landlord, but also then just like a better job of advocating for yourselves with the city now, because, you go to a council meeting, you email, a council member. It's not just like one person. It's like this whole union of, 100 households or however many households. And it was like, oh, now I have to pay attention because it's not just like one crank, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point too, because I think while there's a lot of these big pictures issue with renting that need to be fixed in various regulation or whatever, it's also like the behavior of individual landlords. And so those tenant unions allow you to address the issues that are specific to you. Like if I wanted to be like, we need to stick up for tenants' rights, my landlord does way too many random no notice inspections. That's not a problem for every renter. That's just my landlord's specific thing.
Right.
So it wouldn't, you can't advocate for that on a city or state level, but a tenants union, we could all kind of agree. Yeah, that's annoying that they keep doing that.
Yeah. And then, as we get more and more tenant unions, it's like the first one's always the hardest, right? Because people are like, what is that? That's weird. Why do I have to do all this work to organize the thing? But, as people see that, like, oh, people are getting benefits from this, then hopefully that builds kind of more collective power, which, like I said earlier, right, it gives you more influence on a city level as well. It gives you more influence at the county level, at the state level, as the movement builds. And, like one of the things that we need as leftists is, to band together and make sure that we have those collective voices. So yeah, I think that all the unions, whether tenant or employee unions, like those are all a big part of that puzzle.
Moving away from housing here, and onto more broader economic issues. You've talked a bunch on your issues page about corporate power playing a major role in Iowan politics in kind of the Des Moines metro area. So I think maybe, before we ask what can we do to that about this, maybe paint a picture for someone who maybe isn't in Des Moines or whatever. What does corporate power look like on a day-to-day level here in this area?
Yeah. So even just like on a local politics level, an example for like West Des Moines specifically, our former mayor worked for a realty company, which if that's who you work for, pretty much every thought you ever have about how to run a city is kind of a conflict of interest, because like you're coming at it from that mindset of like what's good for, but a lot of our elected officials have pretty heavy ties to the various the various property owners around town, and a big part of that is just like, well, that's who can afford to even run, right?
Right.
As a bartender, right? You can't be like, "Hi, boss, I'm gonna go spend 6 months campaigning," or
right,
right. So people whose vested interests are in, making sure that the city is run in a way that works more towards their profitability are going to be the ones who are more apt to support, their employees running or their friends or, yeah. So it's just like, there's a lot of money to be made in cities, and controlling where development happens and when it happens helps a lot in making that money. Actually, so like one of our council members, his family does property speculation, right? So like, boy, it sure is convenient that the city is growing in the areas where your family happens to own a lot of land, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I'm not even saying like he's necessarily intending to do anything nefarious. It's just like, but that's
where his interests lie. Yeah.
Right. That's where his interests lie. And that's who is most able to like put together the money to run and the time to run is, people who have a vested interest in things turning out a specific way.
So what can we do to fight this kind of takeover of corporate power here in the Des Moines Metro?
Yeah. So I think it starts with, just kind of like banding together as people, right? So like I talked about, employee unions, right? Or worker unions. There we go. Tenant unions. Those are both kind of like things that we can start at a fairly small scale to slowly gain power. Find people who are running and support them, right? Like, so I will say, we have to find each other as leftists, right? So like if you went to like the No Kings protest, PSL, they had a little table in the booth, right? They're like, hi, we exist. Here's what we're working on. DSA had members out passing out flyers, being like, hi, we exist. Like, come join us, like some of the smaller political candidates, like Andy Montalvales, he's running for city council in Des Moines. He was out there, he was working the crowd, being like, hi, I'm running for city council in Des Moines. So like we kind of have to just get out there and do the work, which is really hard when, you're working 2 jobs and you're like, fuck, man, I'm tired. I want to sit down and just like chill out for a while. So like, it's hard. It's not easy, but that's part of it. Or even, less leftist organizations, get involved in the local Democrats or the Next Century Forum, which is more a slightly younger Democrats, right? Because ultimately, like a lot of decisions are made by the people who show up, which means we have to show up. Yeah. Well, who shows up? It's retirees who have, they don't have anything better to do. So they're like, oh, I can do this. I can show up to this because they're not working, a job and a half or 2 jobs or, so they have a little more energy, but that also means, they're not necessarily representing the perspective of, younger generations who can't afford to go buy a house.
Well, a lot of policies that you're, suggesting that you're interested in here I think I've already seen, who you're running against call them this, you get called utopian or unrealistic or whatever. So how do you respond to that kind of, criticism when you get it?
I have not had anyone call it utopian or unrealistic. But yeah, I can see where someone might be coming from. But the world moves forward through acts of unreasonable men, right? Are you familiar with, I'm butchering that quote, but right, like accepting the status quo doesn't improve things. So we have to push back and think, okay, but it's those utopian visions that give us something to strive for, right? Are we going to hit that in 4 years? No. Are we going to hit that in 80? Maybe, but it might be a stretch still. But like, at least let's work towards it, right? Rather than just being like, oh, the thing that we're doing now is totally the thing we should do forever. Like, we know the problems with it, right? And like West Des Moines specifically, like, okay, we're not quite as far along as say like Orange County, California, and the problems with sprawl, but we can look to places like that and see like, oh yeah, sprawl does have problems. Maybe we should address those problems before we start to experience all of that pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so how do we deal with kind of the budgetary restrictions how do we maintain a healthy city budget while reaching toward these utopian goals that
Yeah.
long term we want?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things I think about kind of like the urbanist perspective is that like a lot of the things that we push for end up being better for city finances, right? So like if you've got more people in a given area, that's more taxes paying for the same amount of infrastructure, right? So like Valley Junction is a much denser neighborhood, so we have more properties paying for road that services more people. Whereas, like if you've got these big acre lots, multi-acre lots, well, you've got a lot more road, a lot more pipe, a lot more conduit, a lot more of all of this infrastructure that you then have to pay for, but you've got a lot fewer people paying for it. The dollar value per acre generally tends to be a lot lower. So dollar value per acre, that's kind of a measurement that we use in sort of urbanist circles to kind of look at, to kind of compare property value. So you look at like dollar value per acre, and like the dollar value per acre of say like Jordan Creek Mall is, I don't know the exact number, but it's not super high. Like it's higher than like single family residential zones, but it's not super high. But you've got all of this like massive automotive infrastructure to support that development. On the other hand, like some of the properties like on Fifth Street and Valley Junction, right, they're small properties, but the dollar value per acre is off the charts by comparison. And but they only really need to support the, like 50 feet of road in front of them. One of those makes a lot more sense than the other, right? From a fiscal perspective. So it's like, okay, well, if we design our cities better, that actually works out better from a tax perspective. And then we have more resources to fund busing. We have more resources to fund, like all of these programs. So
yeah, and I mean on just a basic quality of life level, like I live much closer to the Jordan Creek area than the Valley Junction area. Valley Junction is a way better area. Like it's more walkable. There's more stuff to do. As like if you don't own a car over here, if you're without a car, there's you could walk an hour to get to a coffee shop maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, why wouldn't we want more Valley Junctions? Why do we make Valley Junctions illegal to build in the rest of the city when it's like, but that's clearly like such a better place to be. Yeah. Whereas like you could live in the apartment complexes across the street from Jordan Creek Mall, and you're probably still going to drive to the mall because crossing the street on foot, walking through this giant parking lot is unpleasant.
Well, yeah. So how do we kind of increase the amount of and we've actually kind of already gotten into this, but to kind of return to it, like increase the amount of democracy in the lives of everyday West Des Moines residents. We don't, it's really hard to feel like we have any say ever. I think, especially if you're, a renter in West Des Moines, you're not a landowner, you're one of the people that works at the coffee shops that everyone else is going to. You don't really feel like you have any say in your city. How do we empower citizens and allow them to directly impact the proceedings of the city we live in? So
one of those is like organize. And unfortunately, that's like me saying like, okay, people, here's some work for you to do.
Right.
But ultimately, like you've got to organize, right? Like your landlord absolutely belongs to like a collection of other landlords, right? So like they're organized. We need to be too. So on a city level, I think some of the things that we can do. So like we have some boards and commissions. I think those boards and commissions need to be paid so that people who can serve on them are not just people who have like the wealth and time and capacity, but people who, like might not otherwise be able to afford, like, oh, I need to hire a babysitter. I can't afford that, so I can't serve. Like we need to pay so that people can actually like afford the babysitter. They can afford the gas. They can afford to take time off work, whatever it is they need to do to actually serve on those boards and commissions. One of the other things that I think we should experiment with is called a citizens assembly. So that's kind of like jury duty, where you get drafted and then expected to serve, but then you would be looking So like any given assembly would be looking at like one specific issue, and you would hear from all kinds of policy experts around that issue and all kinds of people who have thoughts on that issue, whatever that issue is, right? It could be a zoning issue, it could be an animal welfare issue, it could be a bicycle infrastructure issue, whatever it is, but like, and then like, so you kind of pull a diverse and representative sample of people from the city. You pay them well for their time, and then you have them like sit there, learn about an issue, and then make a recommendation. And then like we as a city can then adopt that. But then, like, it's not just like, people with a vested interest in that particular issue. It's not just, it's not just, your city officials who are listening to maybe citizens who are able to be loud rather than just like a representative sample, or, people with money who are like, hey, I can donate this to your campaign if you push things this direction. And I'm not saying that happens. I don't know. But it certainly is possible, right? So by having, so we can actually like empower people to make decisions just in like how we set things up for those decisions to be made. And obviously, like, I'm not saying we should do a jury duty kind of thing where it's just like, oh, you have to serve, haha, you're screwed now. But like we take volunteers, right? Then we pull from the volunteer pool, but part of it is like we have to, as a city, like enable people to make decisions, which and that's one idea at least.
No, that's really good. And that combined with as we've talked about unions, we've talked a bunch about unions here. This is also another way that we, feel like we have more say in what's happening in our lives. So
yeah, for sure.
Well, one thing that makes us not feel like we have a say in our lives is one of the issues you've talked a bit about here that we haven't touched on yet, which is right to privacy and your kind of desire to resist mass surveillance. Like, why is this an important issue to you, and where do you see invasions of privacy and ongoing surveillance manifested in West Des Moines?
Yeah, so privacy has always been a big issue for me personally. I've always kind of like, I've avoided, for the most part, like social networking, because I'm like, you don't need my data. That's which is a bit of a challenge as like someone running for office, right?
Right.
So like, I've had to learn like how do you do Instagram or social networking, and I'm still not great at it. So that's definitely a challenge. But like, right, in theory, we have a constitutional right to privacy, but then we get around it by being like, oh, well, the Constitution doesn't say corporations can't spy on you, so let's just hire corporations to spy on you. Like, that's just a runaround, but like, you're still violating the thing, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
So I'm not a huge fan of that. And like cameras are a really useful tool in a lot of ways. So like, pretty much every intersection we have in West Des Moines has a camera that's basically there to like detect like, oh, there are cars that are here. I need to change the light to the other direction or whatever. Right. So like cameras are useful, right? And they do help track down people. But there's a cost to that as well, right? So like for flock cameras in particular, because that is a corporate surveillance and it's not just like West Des Moines police who have access to those cameras. Anyone who uses Flock has access to those feeds. And so like, it's not just like, oh, our cops in West Des Moines, they're fine. We trust them. We totally trust them to like, do the right thing with those feeds and not like violate people's privacy or whatever. But also like, a police department in Wyoming has access to that too. So like, like a police officer whose, girlfriend moved away to get away from him, and then she like moved to West Des Moines. Well, okay, well that officer can then like follow her across the U.S. and be like, oh, that's where she moved, and track her down. Like, and like West Des Moines police don't really have any oversight over that because because that's not their system. So, it's one of those things like, okay, I trust our cops, but do I trust every single cop in every single jurisdiction everywhere in the US? Right? Maybe not. So you kind of get that problem on
Hmm.
top of just like you have, so like you can Google like flock and ice and get results from like this year of like flock providing through various jurisdictions providing ice access to data to follow people around. It's like, do we want to enable that as a city? Like that seems like a
Hmm.
discussion at least worth having.
Well, outside of fixing our public transit system, obviously that's a big thing here. What
Yeah.
policies are you interested in to make West Des Moines more green, more environmentally conscious? Talk of environmentalism often scares people, so help explain why environmentalism on this local level will help improve people's quality of life, not just make it another obnoxious application or something.
So the interesting thing about environmentalism is that it doesn't necessarily look like what people expect it to. So an example of that is like New York City, Manhattan Island, right? Like per capita is really environmentally friendly,
Hmm.
right? Because people take rich and poor alike take the subway system, right? A lot fewer people are driving, and uh, like because everything is so condensed, people walk, which is better for health outcomes, but it's also better for the environment. You have a lot more efficiencies on that level, which I'm not saying let's turn West Des Moines into Manhattan or anything like that, but like
Hmm.
density is good for the environment, right? So you know the more, this is a terrible way to phrase it, but like the more people we can cram into a smaller area, the better that is environmentally. And
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean like all we're like sardines in a sardine can, but it means just like gentle density, like Valley Junction. For people
Hmm.
who are familiar with that, right? It's one of the denser neighborhoods in West Des Moines. It still doesn't feel all that dense, right? And
No, no.
it's yeah, and it's kind of like the bare minimum level of density that you need for like an effective bus transit system and that kind of thing. So like the more we can get people out of their cars, the better that is for the environment. Like the more, the easier it is to like walk to, the coffee shop, to the grocery store, or take a bike there,
Hmm.
or, go to a show and not have to hop in your car, but you can walk, you can take public transit, whatever. That's so much better for the environment. And it's also better for the city's finances, and it's better for health outcomes. It's like, it's better in basically every possible way. And it often ends up being better for drivers too, because it's like, hey, all of those people who are bad drivers who don't want to drive but have to, well, if they're off the road, now you don't have to deal with them.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody's lives get better. We just have to like allow it.
Well, anything else you want to mention before we wrap up here?
Sure. I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about environmentalism, because like
Yeah, go for it.
one of the other things is like grass lawns are just terrible for the environment, right?
Yeah.
They're basically dead space. So like we need to allow more native plants, and like frankly, we should
Yeah.
encourage them. And well, guess what? Native plants are going to grow higher than 10 inches. So like, we need to not have code that says, oh, you have to maintain your lawn to be perfectly cut and all that. It's like, let flowers grow, let like native strawberries grow, let all of these things grow. The other thing is like even small stuff environmentally. So for instance, when the city redid the street in front of my house like a
Hmm.
decade ago or so, they roll out these big they roll out these big sod mats, but those sod mats that they roll out were held together with plastic netting. So
Yeah.
the city basically paid a contractor to dump plastic trash into our environment. Maybe let's not do that. You know, the environment, like it's big things, but it's also those little things like that.
Well, thank you so much for your time and everything. When is the election, and how can people support your campaign?
Yeah. So technically, the election is going on right now. You can do early
Oh,
voting
good.
at the county offices now, at least during
Hmm.
weekdays. But the official election date is November 4th. Uh, you know, Definitely one of the ways you can support. Get out and vote.
Hmm.
Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you don't like me, tell your enemies. But and a big part is, kind of like what we talked about earlier, is like, find people you like and support them, whether it's getting out and knocking doors, whether it's donating, which, I mean, at this point, money doesn't do me a lot of good, but
Sure.
like, especially, like, if you have neighbors who are like, hey, you're really good at this stuff, like, encourage them to run, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because fundamentally, like, leftists aren't going to get anywhere if we're not out there doing the work. So we've got to get out there and do the work, and we've got to find each other. We've got to support each other. And like, West Des Moines, in theory, we have like a slight lean towards the Democrats, but a lot of our demographic are older. So like, they're definitely the more conservative Democrats who are like, oh yeah, this Republican, he's fine, I'll vote for him.
Right. Right.
So like, to push things left, we got to get out there and we got to push. And it's very Sisyphean at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not doing the work, you're not moving the needle. You've got the Overton window, right? Like, it's been shifted very much to the right. We got to start dragging it back, and you do that by getting out and doing a shit ton of work, and it's exhausting. And I think for a while it's probably not going to feel very rewarding, because it's going to be loss after loss after loss. But you don't start winning until after you start losing, right? So like, you got to be out there and you got to push. And it's scary and it's hard, but you can complain online, or you can actually, get out and do the work. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, MJ Hoag.
thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out with the algorithm. And if you really like what you heard, consider supporting the show on Patreon. One of the benefits of supporting this show on Patreon is that you get your name read out at the end of every episode. So without further ado, this episode is brought to you by our lovely patrons, who include Leo Zachary Dickinson, I'm once again, Philip Cozy, I Drink Corn Syrup, Yum, Vita Breva, Avokai Brodagam, Caleb Sutton, Regular Sized Horse, parentheses small, Kyle Gannis, Moss, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, Stephen A.K. Spike Stonehand, Gavin Aronson, Joseph Gross, Robert Eilman, Attention Francis, Shy, Randy Sutton, Josh Christensen, Caleb Butler, Ross Ben Daniels, Stephanie R., Frankie Teardrop, Martha Zumak, Benjamin Rawls, Ian Friedenberg, Ian S., James Lunt, A. Aaron, Grouchy S. Marxius, Rufus Truthus, Electron Shed, Ficus, Bramble Light Garden, Jacob Dallas, Kitty Sparks, Alan, and of course, Chris Barker. Thank you so much for supporting the show. I could not be doing this without you.